Okay, we are here live with one of the most extraordinary people I literally have ever met in my life. Max, are you there?
I'm here. Technical difficulties, but we got it solved.
They didn't want to do this. Um, Before we get started, this reminds me of my days of trial work as a trial lawyer. We always had to what's called establish the foundation and authenticating a witness as an expert. And although the people that are probably going to see this and know me and trust me and love me, they don't know much about you. And so I wanted to give just a little bit of background about you so that, they understand where you're coming from in terms of what your experience and history in the financial and cryptocurrency and monetary interests are over the last, decade and a half or so. So that being said, can you just give us a little bit of insight as to who you are and what brought you to where we are today?
Sure. So I grew up collecting coins as a kid, gold and silver. I always had an interest in numismatics. Started trading stocks in my dorm room when I was 13 over a 56K modem. Put myself through first boarding school and then Stanford. Started a business in my dorm room. Ended up dropping out after 2 years because at that age you know everything, and was making too much money and said, it doesn't make sense to be here sitting in this 2-hour economics 101 class when I could be out producing. So from 1999 to 2016, I built my business or set of businesses currently known as Toner.com Group, which I still own, based out of Switzerland. And so in 2016, I was able to take my foot off the gas pedal and hand the steering wheel to my longtime team of executives that we built up over those 17 years, and was able to meet my modest lifestyle needs, and had a few nickels in my pocket and time on my hands. And I was traveling in Europe, specifically Romania, and a 2-week trip turned out into a 4-week trip, and I ran out of medication. And because I wasn't part of the local social insurance system, I couldn't import it. I didn't want to go sit at a hospital for 8 hours. So anyway, I went to one of these darknet places and found what I needed, and it was shipped from Ukraine, I think it was. And I said, aha, Paul Krugman and Nouriel Roubini and Jamie Dimon, all these guys that are saying that Bitcoin is useless are wrong, because it just was very useful to me. This magic internet money was able to have somebody in Ukraine send me my medication and get me solved. Wow, this is amazing. I had to go to a kiosk at the mall and buy physical cash and figure out how to do it. It was a wonderful learning experience. That was summer 2016. And then I said, wow, I am just so dense. I knew about Bitcoin in the early years, reading Wired magazine and growing up in Silicon Valley, always having a tech interest. But I just believed the narrative of the wrong people who had an agenda in the preservation of the current paradigm, who said this thing has no value. And yet it did. So I fell head over heels in love from around mid 2016 until today. I've probably spent 16 hours a day, 7 days a week studying this stuff. I didn't know what Ethereum was in January 2017, but by the end of the year, I had bought over 50 ICOs and had positions in hundreds of liquid coins and tokens, and a learning by doing process. And then since then have just proceeded to get interested in every area of this exploding field, from mining to trading to over a dozen startups that I've helped incubate in the Epicentral ecosystem. Hedge funds, yeah.
Before we go even further down that rabbit hole, which I absolutely want to do, that brought you to where we are today, and after you had dropped out of Stanford and creating Epic Cash and all the great things that you're doing around the world with crypto, I wanted to dial it back, because so much of this, I think, what do they say, that necessity is the mother of invention, right? And I guess in many ways that was ultimately, 2008, 2009, Satoshi Nakamoto, with the invention and advent of of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in general came from some problems that we were having. But I wanted to go back even further. When I look at your Facebook page, it says where we're from, and mine says Trenton, New Jersey, and yours says Jekyll Island. And I don't think people know what that means. And so I want to go back that far. And, my discussions with you are some of the most incredible. You have one of the best descriptions of what, like, the creation of money, how it was used, and what's happened to it over the last 200 years, and what's led us to where we are. So if we can go back that far, and not too, I don't want to go too long, but if you could just give us your view of like how we got to where we are today, up to the point that there was a need for cryptocurrency or forms of money.
All right, well, let's work back from today, and then if we want to stop at any given point, we can, and I'll try not to go too deep in detail, but if you have any further questions, we can dive into a particular part. So today in 2022, we have what's known as a fiat currency standard. Fiat means by decree. If you go back to 1971, specifically August 15th, 1971, when the Federal Reserve note, commonly referred to as a United States dollar, although those two things are not the same, was backed by physical gold. And you could redeem a Federal Reserve note for 1/35 of an ounce of physical gold upon demand by presenting said notes to the Federal Reserve Bank, specifically of New York, and they would give you the gold. And so due to the guns and butter policies of the Vietnam War, but basically we couldn't meet the gold obligations anymore. And Charles de Gaulle of France sent warships to New York Harbor to say, hey, give me my gold. Nixon gave him the gold and then closed the window and said nobody else can get their gold. So from 1971 all the way back to 1945, at the end of World War II, the Allied victorious nations got together and decided to create a post-war monetary paradigm wherein all of the nations, or the world's fiat currencies, would be pegged to the dollar, which itself was pegged to gold, and crucially redeemable for gold. And that was the grounding force that kept the governments and central banks of the world from creating too much currency, because if they did, then they would lose all their gold and face a run on the banks. So now we're in 1945. Before that, the British pound was the king of the hill monetarily. All this time, the US dollar was 1/35 of an ounce of gold. It was pegged there by international monetary agreement between states and central banks, mainly originating out of the Bank for International Settlements, headquartered in Basel, Switzerland, which is kind of like the central bank of central banks. So you really have to figure out how we got to the mess that we're in today. I don't even want to say where it all started, because it started as far back as Babylon. But in our most recent era, you have to go back to 1910. So 1910, the reason I put my birthplace as Jekyll Island as a little funny joke for those with the eyes to see on Facebook, to know, what's really going on here with this. Is a bunch of conspirators got together to hijack the United States economy through banking subterfuge. And so JP Morgan and Rockefeller and Rothschild type interests, elite old money families, behind the scenes type of guys, they crashed the economy and financial markets in 1907. It was the panic of 1907. And they said, oh, what do we need? Banking reform. And if we don't want to have these markets crash again and banks fail and everybody lose all their money, farms going bust and so on, we need banking reform. And so there was something called the Aldrich bill, Senator Nelson Aldrich, and they had a plan to do exactly the same thing as the Federal Reserve. And the country was horrified and said, hell no, we're not doing that. And then so they rebranded it as the Federal Reserve plan and came up with some controlled opposition tactics where Aldrich and his cronies said, "We hate that plan," and basically tricked everybody to approve it. It was pushed through in the middle of the night, right before Christmas, when everybody was gone, under Woodrow Wilson. And in his memoirs, he actually says, "I've consigned my children and grandchildren to slavery. I can't believe what I've done." So the Federal Reserve is the fourth privately owned central bank, and it's not a part of the federal government and has no reserves. So it's entirely fraudulently named. This is the fourth private central bank we've had in the country. The reason I use Andrew Jackson as my namesake online is because he was elected on a single campaign promise, which was to end the third central bank that this nation has suffered under, which was called the Second Bank of the United States. We had another one back during the immediate post-revolutionary era called the Bank of the United States. It had a 20-year charter that was not renewed. And then before the country was actually formed, we had something called the Bank of North America. So we could be here all day talking about more detail, but that's how we got here.
Thank you. No, and it's fascinating. I mean, I don't remember ever, and look, self-admittedly, I didn't pay attention in school as much as I probably should have. But I don't ever remember hearing anything like this that I know would have piqued my interest.
They don't teach. No, they don't teach this.
They don't teach this, right? And that's my point. And not only do they not teach this, in large part, they don't teach finance. You know, there are exceptions, economic majors, things. But I know some people who you and I both know together that were economics majors. It wasn't until they graduated from Ivy League schools and they were out in the quote unquote real world and started talking to people that they really learned about money and how money works. So for me, I went to college, I graduated from law school, and it took me a couple of years to realize essentially financially illiterate. And that was that was an interesting moment, because I said, wait a minute, I went to school, I went to law school, think I know a thing or two. But when I had to kind of put my ego on the shelf, I said, I don't really know much about money. And I don't know that that's by accident, right? So I started trying to learn everything that I could. And that's what introduced me to people and to the idea of crypto. What is it fundamentally? You know, I don't think, quite frankly, that people know the difference between money and currency. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely.
What
and
is
all of this learned helplessness is by design, by the way. So the educational system that we had a few centuries ago was aimed at creating well-rounded, independent thinkers who could creatively problem solve. But with the Industrial Revolution, we needed factory workers who were just smart enough to operate the machines, but not too smart to unseat their their owners and managers. So if you look at things like Common Core and other things like that, where our kids are being taught to question the fact that 1 + 1 = 2. It matters what your feelings are that day, or what your gender identity concept is, or things like that. These themes are not new.
Yeah. And so, like, when people, you see all these memes and everything all over social media, money, pounds of money, $100 bills, that's not money, right? That's currency. And I think fundamentally, like, if we had to, because some of the people that will be listening to this, they really don't know much about crypto at all. And they're
sure.
But I think it's important to understand the foundation. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, that's a great one. So money is something that you can hold in your possession, that you have absolute title to, that does not depend on any third party. So there's a famous quote from JP Morgan: gold is money, everything else is credit. And so back in the day, when you had a lump of gold in your pocket, or let's say a gold coin rather, that was a bearer instrument that had intrinsic value for its utility as jewelry, as a store of value. Nowadays it has value as electronics, scarcity, value, ductility, all the reasons why gold has a value. So you have an asset in your possession that has a value, and it doesn't depend on the performance of anyone else. If you look at a bank note, back in the day, physical currency used to be an IOU, a claim check for a certain amount of gold. When the country was created, it was $20 dollars, I think $20.67 was the rate of gold to the dollar, and then $35 in the 1930s during the Depression. So currency, I think of it as an IOU. It's a claim check representing a promise to pay money. And now all these lines are getting further blurred, but absolutely, money cannot be created out of thin air, but currency can. And that's why you've seen the constant erosion in purchasing power of the US dollar versus gold, which has eroded by about 98% over the past 100-ish years.
Max, can you, because you just said something that's really important that I want to gloss over it. You use the phrase purchasing power. Just for people that don't understand that, what does that mean? If I take $1,000 and I store it under my mattress today, what effect does time have on that?
Yeah, so if you go back to 1971, there's a great website I would encourage everyone to check out called WTFhappenedin1971.com. So when my parents were young, a high school graduate could sweep a floor in a factory, earning a living, and own his home, have a stay-at-home wife, own a car, kids could go to school, and basically have a decent living. And today you have both parents working 7 jobs between them, going further into debt every year. And the reason that happens is because the purchasing power, in other words, what they can buy for their currency, let's say you own $50,000 a year and you used to pay $2 a gallon to drive to work, and now you're paying $5 a gallon. Okay, well, if your salary stayed the same nominally at 50,000, you just got a lot poorer, because your 12-pack of LaCroix sparkling water used to be $2.99, and now an 8-pack is $6.99. I could go on with all these examples. Inflation is, to use a Milton Friedman quote, inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. It is an excess of currency creation that diminishes the value of the existing currency units, and that is recognized by something known as the Cantillon effect, where you observe that the places that are closest to those money spigots of freshly created currency that are able to spend it into the economy fastest, you have things like $100 million apartments in financial centers like New York and London, and so on. And so we are all basically being stolen from as the value of our existing currency is diluted from the creation of more currency units.
So there are a certain amount of dollars in existence, and then somebody decides to hit a switch and they create more dollars, and so therefore the dollars are less. Is that kind of in layman's terms what you're referring to?
Yeah. So if you go back to Economics 101, people might be familiar with the idea of money supply. So you have M0, M1, M2, M3, and so on. So if you go back to the GFC, the Great Financial Crisis in 2007, 2008 era, the M1 currency supply was $1 trillion. So from 1776 until 2007, we got up to $1 trillion. So imagine a pizza pie that doesn't have any slices in it. You have just a one, so it's one whole slice, a 12-inch pizza pie, let's say. Yeah. Then you go to February 2020, so 15 years, and that pizza pie got cut into 4 slices because the currency supply increased from 1 trillion to 4 trillion. So our wealth was diluted by a factor of 3 out of 4. You used to be able to eat the whole pie. Now you can only eat a quarter of a pie because it's been cut into 4 slices. You know what the number is today in the past 2 years? 21 trillion.
Yeah.
So that pizza pie that you used to own and eat the whole thing of 15 years ago, now is cut into 21 slices. It's amazing gas isn't $700 a gallon.
So let me, just a question that's kind of been on the forefront of my mind. When you go back to money and the quote, you talked about money with regard to gold. Is gold, though, can't they influence or manipulate the price of gold based on based on everything that we know? Shouldn't the price of gold be much higher per ounce of silver and some of the metals?
Yeah, exactly. So the so-called stock to flow ratio, the amount of new gold that is created every year through mining, it expands the supply of above ground gold by about 2% per year. So the supply grows by that rate, and it's been fairly predictable for thousands of years. So the reason that we don't have $25,000 gold is because there is this idea of paper gold. The futures markets, specifically the London Gold Pool and the COMEX in the United States, they basically manipulate the markets by creating paper gold futures contracts out of thin air. Something like 100 times the annual global mining production of planet Earth is traded every day in the futures markets, and they never have to deliver. And so JP Morgan and Scotiabank and all the other big so-called bullion banks have been busted many times for decades for actually selling the same gold that they hold in their warehouses 10 times over. So when they audit the records, they say, you have this gold and you have this gold and you have this gold. I mean, it's just completely fraudulent. The Hunt brothers back in the 1980s, Nelson and Bunker Hunt, tried to corner the silver market by taking delivery, and they basically changed the rules and rug pulled them and said, no, you can't have physical silver. And now there's all these position limits and stuff like that. JP Morgan actually got sued by something called the Gold Antitrust Action Committee, GATA. The way I got into crypto, incidentally, was through precious metals. I built my wealth that I created in my business outside the banking system because I didn't trust it in physical precious metals. So I understood the scarcity arguments related to hard money, and then just realized that crypto was a better mousetrap in that respect. So essentially, you have large-scale fraud and deception that's preventing true market discovery. And just like Margaret Thatcher said, that socialism works great until you run out of other people's money, and communism worked behind the Iron Curtain, but could only work long-term if they had the whole planet under control. Eventually, free market systems prevail. We're seeing the same thing here as free market money, first exemplified by Bitcoin, then became compromised, crippled what we now know as Bitcoin Core, and then today Epic as the natural successor, as the leading free market hard money that exists. You can't really put the genie back in the bottle. There's only 14 million Epic, and there's trillions of new fiat currency units being created constantly. Epic has a scarcity function that is inelastic. Yeah, go ahead.
When you talk about, I want to get into that a little bit later, or perhaps on the next one, just to dive really deep with regard to Epic. But I want to understand, I want to try and help people understand what led us to, or is bringing us to that point, that crypto is important. It is something to pay attention to, that there are a lot of them out there that don't make sense. And there are some that make a lot of sense. And the one that we're talking about is Epic. And obviously not financial advice, go do your own research, all that great stuff. But you and I have spoken a lot, and I've been involved in this project for a long time, and I've seen enough to know that it's truly extraordinary. I've gone on national television to talk about it. So before we touch on that a little bit, you obviously developed this extraordinary, insatiable appetite to understand history and banking and business. That got you into one of the top schools in the country, Stanford, which most people, that would be one of the high points of their lives. And then graduating would probably be the next highest point. But that's not the route you went, right?
Yeah, I dropped out after my second year.
You dropped out of Stanford. And what were you doing that led you to the decision that dropping out of Stanford was the right choice?
So I started my first businesses as a kid. I was working for my dad's small office supplies company. I was packing boxes in the warehouse as a kid. And then I kind of fell into it. There was a hospital that was getting rid of some old copiers, and I took all my money when I was 12 years old and bought a dozen copiers from this hospital. They were old, but they were from a hospital, so they were perfect, cosmetically, working well and all that good stuff. So I stuck them in liquor stores, not liquor stores, those little corner bodegas, and had passive income all throughout high school, which was great. So I already had a background in business and knew I had an interest in making money. And so in Stanford, what I did was I used the school's T1 line to hook up a fax server that I would run at night. And I got into trading the physical consumable commodities. So things like the toner cartridges and data storage tapes for the backup things, or the backup storage devices for servers and stuff like that. So basically, as the industry was changing, I pioneered a business model to buy the excess consumables that were left over at the end of the upgrade cycle, and then export them to other countries, and basically turn one man's trash into another man's treasure. So I had a bunch of my dorm mates doing administrative work for me. I was making about $2,000 an hour in profits for every hour that I spent at the office. So I would cram all my classes into the morning and then race down the 280 to this little warehouse. This was pre-technology, so I had to do everything by handwriting and fax. And I ended up writing some warehouse automation and logistics code with a friend of mine. I'm not a dumb guy, but this guy runs circles around me. And so when he graduated, he ended up going to work at Goldman Sachs doing their high frequency trading backbone architecture, to give you an idea of what type of genius this guy is. So I basically paid my best friend double his best offer out from the marketplace to come and help me automate the systems to do the trading that I was doing myself at school, and then scaled out that organization over the next 17 years. That group of businesses has about 100 plus staff in 6 countries and distribution facilities all over the world, and has done millions of e-commerce orders and so on. And I never had any partners or financing or support or anything like that. I just woke up every day and bootstrapped, kind of one step at a time.
Amazing. And at some point, crypto. So, right. So
yeah, 2016.
2016, while you're at Stanford, you're introduced to it. What's your
no, Stanford was 1998 and 99, or 97, 98. Yeah, by 2016, I was 38 at the time, just to be clear.
Crypto, so that's right. But I wanted to go back. So that happened, like you said, took us through that period of time where you were really, I mean, globally doing phenomenally, then introduced to crypto. Your initial response, and remember, we have a lot of people here that will listen that are still, they're very curious, but they're very skeptical. They don't understand it. Some people see it as gambling. Some people see it as, things to be used on the black market, just no idea or understanding. So what was your initial introduction, and how would you explain what crypto is to the crypto curious today?
Yeah, so cryptocurrency, blockchain, and distributed ledger are 3 related terms that mean different things. So cryptocurrency, as the name implies, is where you're able to create scarce digital private property that is not controlled by any central authority, that has an independent value as a monetary commodity out in the marketplace. So if we go back to 2008, the network launched in 2009, to what started it all, which is Bitcoin. Satoshi Nakamoto created Bitcoin, if you read the white paper, as a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. And it's a very specific type of system. It reads something like this. A peer-to-peer version of electronic cash would allow online payments to be sent directly from one party to another without going through a financial institution. And so before that invention, it was not possible to send payments between one party and another without going through a financial institution. So Satoshi Nakamoto created this concept of provable digital scarcity. And there's a lot of technical minutia and nuance that make that happen. But suffice it to say, Bitcoin is an economic paradigm, a scarcity standard with respect to time, where the number of currency units in existence is strictly regulated according to an algorithm that modulates the emission rate. So just like the supply of gold grows at 2% per year, in Bitcoin, the way it works is when the network first started, this is Bitcoin Core, Epic's a little different, there were 50 coins per block that came out every 10 minutes. Then 4 years later, there's 25 coins per block. Another 4 years, 12 and a half. Now it's 6.25, and then 3.125, 1.5625, and so on. So if you think about it, just as the difficulty of mining new gold protects the value of the above ground gold, it is the increasing difficulty of producing new coins that protects the value of the already existing circulating coins. So technically speaking, that is supply. You have a supply function that is inelastic in response to price signals from the market and is itself disinflationary.
Got it. So we're doing this interview on 4th of July weekend. Independence Day is coming up, and tied to independence is obviously freedom. How does crypto lead to, in your opinion, or not, financial freedom and independence for human beings?
Well, I had a moral crisis many years ago. Madeleine Albright, when she was asked whether the 500,000 Iraqi children that were killed to protect oil interests, whether it was worth it, and she said yes. And I calculated my share of the culpability for those 500,000 children, and said, wait a minute, I'm funding death and destruction on the other side of the world, and I have no ability to not participate because my funding of the the machinery of death is implicit in the structure of the way that currency is created, and it flows through the economy. Basically, the Federal Reserve was created in large measure to fund inflationary deficit spending in World War I, as an example. So I was a little slow. It took me till 2016, but when I finally got it, I said, if there is a way for me to conduct my economy outside of this destructive paradigm, then I will not be harming others that I have no quarrel with on the other side of the world. And more importantly, because no one's in control of these networks, the rules are immutable and set in stone when they're created. Sure, you can create other currencies, but you cannot make more of that currency, whether it's Bitcoin Core or Epic or any one of these. There's a lot of networks that are fake decentralized, and those should be avoided, where the developers can monkey around with the settings. That's very important. Incidentally, if people want to learn more about this stuff, I teach at a free online university on Telegram called Freeman U. So if you go to t.me/FreemanU, we talk a lot about this stuff.
It's Telegram. So people not familiar with Telegram, it's the letter t.me/Freeman and the letter U, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah. Max, you just, if you could, you mentioned something. You said decentralized, and earlier in the conversation, you've been using the term centralized. Just for people not familiar with what you're talking about, can you give just a general idea of what?
Yeah. So centralized means that the system depends on a central authority. So the US banking system, as an example, commercial banks, they plug into the Federal Reserve Network, which ultimately depends on its relationship with the US Treasury, which depends on the ability of men with guns to throw you in a cage if you don't give them their cut. So ultimately, these things depend on a specific identifiable group of people who have power and control to keep the hull of the ship intact, as it were. A decentralized system is one where there is no central authority that is in control or that is depended upon to maintain the functioning of the system. So if you look at the Bitcoin Core network, it has 22,000 nodes in, I think, 75 countries. And the network exists simultaneously in all of those 22,000 computers that are replicating that blockchain data file and sharing it on a peer-to-peer basis with each other. In order to shut down that network, you would need to permanently eradicate all 22,000 copies in 75 countries. So that's a tall order. In the case of Epic, we have about 10,000 nodes in 121 countries. The Bitcoin Core blockchain, without getting too technical, is 400 gigabytes and very heavy in terms of resources that are required. The Epic blockchain is only 2.7, so it can run on, for example, a low-end smartphone that older networks can't.
Laptops, gaming computers, smartphones, all of that great stuff.
Yeah, soon even smart TVs and fridges. There will be billions upon billions of nodes.
Yeah, no, really exciting. And all of this stuff with regard to decentralization that you're talking about, and DeFi, which is decentralized finance, I mean, this is relatively new, right? This is a product of the technology that we have today that we didn't have 5 or 10 or 15, 100 years ago.
Yeah, not even 5 years ago. I mean, this stuff was really in its infancy 5 years ago. I'd say DeFi really exploded within the past 2 years.
Got it. If there's massive
and just to put a point, bring that point home, DeFi is the ability to be your own bank and do financial transactions on a peer-to-peer basis using blockchains without going through a financial institution. So for example, if you have digital assets, you can go to lending platforms and use those as collateral to create a loan to yourself. You can loan them out to other people. You can do staking and farming and trading and swapping and all this stuff. So over the next 10 years, we're going to see basically everything that Wall Street and the banking system does moved onto decentralized blockchains.
Got it. So if we had to, keeping in mind the audience talking to, crypto curious, most of them not even into crypto yet, but starting to read about it, starting to hear more about it. What would you say? Why should they be interested in crypto? And we're going to get into Epic in the next episode when we really dive deep. But why should they be? Because most of the people, I think, I wasn't until you and I and people like you started talking, aware of what's really happening with money and banking. Why should people be so interested in crypto, and why specifically Epic?
Yeah, so I would encourage everybody to research what happened in Cyprus in 2013. So everybody's familiar with this idea of bank bailouts. In 2007, 2008 in the US, as an example, the US government decided to bail out the banks. So they took taxpayer dollars and plugged the holes in the banks' balance sheets that were left there when their degenerate gambling on mortgages at that time blew up. And so a bailout is when external money is used to plug holes in insolvent banks. What happened in Cyprus in 2013 was that they had Cyprus is a small island nation off the coast of Turkey in the Mediterranean, and there were basically two main banks in that market. People went to bed on Friday night and had, 200,000 euros in their account, let's say. They woke up on Monday morning to discover that depending on which bank they were in, they either lost 40% in one case or 60% of their money in the other case because the country was insolvent. or specifically their banks were insolvent. Cyprus doesn't have the ability to create reserve currency from nothing as the US did. So they really had not a lot of options. And what they did was they used the money in people's accounts was basically given to the shareholders and management of and counterparties of the insolvent banks. And so that was kind of a trial balloon that went so well that that became law in the entire G20, the group of 20 industrialized nations. Basically, 90+% of the world's economy has laws on the books that the next time the banks have a hiccup, your money will be stolen. So let me just reiterate that. Your money in a bank will be stolen one day. And then you go, well, what about FDIC insurance? The FDIC has something like $1 per $1,000 of liabilities in actual resources, which ultimately just depends on a promise from the government anyway. So you can't count on that. So any money that you have in a bank is vulnerable, and but history doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. And so if you want to opt out of that and not suffer that risk, then you can use a decentralized alternative form of money, in this case, the Epic blockchain protocol, where that can't happen. So I would encourage people to flip the switch on how they are looking at risk, because people think crypto is risky and traditional forms of money are safe, and it's actually the other way around. You may have heard the phrase "Great Reset." The guys Klaus Schwab and Gates and the other sociopaths at the World Economic Forum, they've told us that their plan is for us to own nothing and yet be happy. So the own nothing part is coming clearly into focus through inflation and other things that are happening to the world economy and financial system. The you'll be happy part is left up to chance. I'm personally skeptical, but I know that you will owe nothing, own a lot, and be quite happy if you spend the time to tune into what's happening with Epic.
Thank you so much. So if people want to learn more, they can go to, like you said, Telegram and learn more. And we're going to do a deeper dive on this. I really wanted to use this as an opportunity to kind of enlighten people on so much of what they don't know, so much of what isn't taught with regard to banking, economics, and finance, and ultimately, obviously what's led to crypto. I don't know if either the people on here right now have any questions. If so, please feel free to unmute and ask any questions. Is there, if not, Max, is there anything else that you'd like to say before we wrap?
I would just say to check us out. There's 2,000 people on Telegram. Mike and I are two of among 200 volunteers in 70 countries for a decentralized autonomous organization, or DAO, known as Epicentral DAO. And so we're a community operated volunteer phenomenon that everyone is welcome to be a part of. We are creating the financial future together. So check us out on Telegram at t.me/epiccash. Our website is epic.tech. There's Facebook, there's Twitter, there's overall a couple hundred different social communities all over the world. So in an age of information, ignorance is a choice, and today ignorance is going to be very expensive. And so you can be on the right side of financial history by simply picking up the signal of what's inevitably coming slightly faster than others who are going to face a lot of financial pain in this upcoming cycle.
Thank you so much, as always, man. For as many times as we've spoken, each time I leave a little smarter from listening to you, and I appreciate that. I'll be in touch, and I'm sure that I'll get some feedback and questions and comments, and then we'll put together maybe a bigger Zoom where we can bring in a lot of people to follow up on some of this and talk more about Epic and everything else that you're doing to try and help so many people.
Yeah, always a pleasure. Set up a Vite wallet, VITE, Vite multi-chain wallet, and give Mike or me or anyone in the Epic community your address, and we'll send you your first bit of coin to get started, and you can play around and experience the future of money firsthand.
Thank you so much, Max. Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Mike. Take care. Bye.